How do we define a resilient future? Is there a need to re-narrate our past and build reconnections? I'd now like to invite Dev Kumar to convene to everyone the inclusion and accessibility statement.
Avani പ്രഭാഷണ ശില്പശാല പരമ്പര അതിന്റെ നടത്തിപ്പിൽ ലിംഗസമത്വത്തിലും വിവേചനങ്ങൾക്ക് അതീതമായ സാമൂഹ്യ വിശ്വാസ്യതയിലും ഊന്നൽ നൽകുന്നതിൽ പ്രതിജ്ഞാബദ്ധമാണ്. നമ്മുടെ വിദ്യാഭ്യാസ മേഖലയിൽ പ്രാതിനിധ്യം ലഭിക്കാത്തവരും പുറത്താക്കപ്പെട്ടവരും ഈ പരമ്പരയുടെ ഭാഗമാക്കുക എന്നത് ഞങ്ങളുടെ മൗലികമായ ലക്ഷ്യമാണ്. വ്യക്തിവിശേഷങ്ങളും സാംസ്കാരിക വൈവിധ്യങ്ങളും അംഗീകരിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ എല്ലാവരെയും ചേർത്ത് പിടിക്കാവുന്ന, എല്ലാവർക്കും പ്രാപ്യമായ ഒരു കൂട്ടായ്മയ്ക്ക് രൂപം കൊടുക്കാനുള്ള ശ്രമമാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ. ഈ പരമ്പരയിലെ പ്രഭാഷണങ്ങൾ മലയാളം, ഹിന്ദി, ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് തുടങ്ങിയ ഭാഷകളിൽ ഒറ്റയ്ക്കോ സംയുക്തമായോ ആയിരിക്കും നടക്കുന്നത്. കൂടാതെ അവ ഇന്ത്യൻ ആംഗ്യ ഭാഷയിലേക്ക് തർജ്ജമ ചെയ്യാനുള്ള ശ്രമത്തിലുമാണ്. ഒരു പുതിയ വിദ്യാഭ്യാസ സ്ഥാപനം എന്ന നിലയ്ക്ക് ന്യൂനപക്ഷ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളെയും അധ്യാപകരെയും ഉൾക്കൊള്ളിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് സമദർശീയമായ ധാർമ്മികത്വമുള്ള ഒരു പഠനാന്തരീക്ഷം കെട്ടിപ്പടുക്കുന്നതിനായി സമാന തൽപരരായ തദ്ദേശ സംഘടനകളുമായി ഞങ്ങൾ സമ്പർക്കത്തിലാണ്. അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ ഞങ്ങളുടെ സ്ഥാപനത്തിന്റെ അടിസ്ഥാന സൗകര്യങ്ങൾ അടക്കം എല്ലാവിധ സാങ്കേതിക വിഭവങ്ങളും പൊതുസമൂഹത്തിന് കൂടി ഉപയോഗപ്രദമാക്കുക എന്നത് ഞങ്ങളുടെ പ്രധാന ലക്ഷ്യമാണ്. അനുസൃതം നടക്കുന്ന ഈ പ്രവൃത്തിയിൽ ക്ഷമയോടെ ഞങ്ങളോടൊപ്പം നിൽക്കുന്നതിന് ഞങ്ങൾ നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുന്നതിനോടൊപ്പം വിലപ്പെട്ട നിർദ്ദേശങ്ങൾ യാതൊരു മടിയും കൂടാതെ ഞങ്ങളെ അറിയിക്കാൻ താല്പര്യപ്പെടുന്നു. അവനി പ്രഭാഷണ ശില്പശാല പരമ്പരയുമായോ മറ്റേതെങ്കിലും പൊതുപരിപാടികളുമായോ ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിങ്ങളുടെ സംശയങ്ങളും അന്വേഷണങ്ങളും ഞങ്ങൾ അയക്കുവാനായി ഉജ്ജയൻ, ദേവകുമാർ എന്നിവരുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെടുക. താങ്ക് യു.
Thank you, Devakar sir. Thank you, Meenakshi, for the inclusion statement and perfectly capturing the vision and the preamble for the lecture series that is Building Voices and Building Alliances. Anu, with your permission, I'd like to start recording the call, if you allow that. Yeah. Okay, so talking about Anu, Dr. Anu Sabhlok's research broadly is in the domain of feminist theory, urban and labor geography, and the emerging area of infrastructure studies. The regional context of her research is South Asia, and the questions she addresses are of global significance. She looks at how social and spatial relationships are mutually constituted. Her current research is an ethnographic study of seasonal migrants working on road construction sites in the Upper Himalayas. She has also investigated how gender meanings and social relations shift across multiple contexts that migrants inhabit. She is currently more than halfway through with the book manuscript titled Road Chronicles, Ethnographic Account of the Indo-Tibetan Border Road. When she is not conducting fieldwork in the Upper Himalayas, she engages in urban research in the Chandigarh Tri-City area. Chandigarh is independent India's first planned city, designed in this style by Le Corbusier. It is a union territory and the state capital for the states of Punjab and Haryana, and is therefore flanked by the two satellite towns, Panchkula and Mohali. Her work investigates the gendered experiences in this planned city and has more recently paid attention to how infrastructure or lack thereof creates uneven geographies that are territorial, intersectional, and relate to broader regional assemblages. Now, I've personally known Anu both as my teacher, mentor, and my friend since my postgrad days at the CCA. I also had an amazing, albeit very short, association with her over the Abohar Fellowship at IISER Mohali. Anu, please take this moment to enlighten us with your talk. I think you can start now, if that's the cue. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ujjant, for this very warm welcome. And thank you to Avani for inviting me to speak with architects of the future. As many of you know, I have myself been trained as an architect in my undergraduate and master's. And at some point, I was quite disillusioned with the pedagogy of architecture, and therefore switched to geography and women's studies. But I believe, from checking out the Avani website and also looking up all the different things that you all are trying to do, is that Avani is here to change that, change what has been static in architectural education, and is innovating with interesting pedagogies that cut across disciplinary boundaries. So with that, let me share my screen now. Yeah, can you see this? Is the screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible. It's visible.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you. So, for past several years, almost 7, 8, perhaps 9, I have been looking at road infrastructures and trying to look at them um, as as sites of social activity, as artifacts, as very contemporary modern art. I mean, perhaps the most quintessential artifact of our modern times, and yet something that is also something that is so embedded in the social and the spatial, and producing certain kinds of narratives, and also engaging with discourses of development, defense, as they intersect with the road infrastructures. In this presentation, though, I will speak to a slightly broader topic of engendering infrastructures, which has also featured in my work on the road. I mean, it's come out quite strongly, as you shall see towards the end of this presentation. But I'll start from a more general story of the kinds of works that is happening in putting together gender and infrastructure. And for many, it kind of sounds like a very odd junction. I mean, infrastructures and artifacts and objects and materials are supposed to be inert things. Like, how do they ever relate to gender at all? So those are the kind of questions that I show and engage with in my research, and I shall share with you. Since most of you all are architects, I believe, here in this talk, I'm putting up this quote by feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed. And she says, "How then is white men built or even a building? Think about it. One practitioner relayed to me how they named buildings in the institution. All dead white men," she said. So basically, she's kind of drawing our attention to the ubiquity of infrastructures that are named with names of men. Streets are often named with male names. Most of the statues that you see in the public sphere are prominent men from our history, and therefore there is very little um, for uh, women and non-normative genders to find something of from that can represent them in these spaces. And quite obviously, then the spaces speak of of a certain power. They speak of who is allowed, who is not allowed, or even if it is not allowed, who is most comfortable in those spaces. For the largest part in human history, most of our institutions, most of our cities, all of our institutions in our cities, perhaps, the structures that govern us, all of that was built based on the concept of some sort of gender blind notion that took perhaps the norm as, perhaps, I'm pretty sure the norm as as that of the male body or men's structures, and that becomes very, very apparent when you start paying attention to some of the way our cities are organized, or as Sarah Ahmed here very clearly shows, the kind of names that are, or I mean, even when you go into websites, the kinds of like who are the ones who are in the decision-making roles. And while things are changing, there's not much that has changed, and there's a lot more work that remains to be done. I have argued elsewhere that it's not just numbers that matter, although they matter definitely to begin, but it's the changing of a larger structure that is required, a structure that is that enables people of a diverse categorizations and varieties to be able to flourish, to sustain, to create and make decisions about their own lives, and to fulfill their work, life, and so on. So for that, just bringing in numbers into an already established structure that was designed and created at a time when it was mostly men in the workforce, it was mostly men in the decision-making spaces, it was mostly men who was creating these cities, is not going to make much difference. There will be one step, but we need to bring about a structural change in many of those things that we have built for ourselves. Some very obvious examples. A recent movie, Gunjan Saxena, that was released on Netflix, I believe, during the lockdown, has a very telling scene where Gunjan, who is one of the first women pilots in the Indian Air Force, goes around searching for a woman's toilet, and there is none. And one of her senior officers jokes and says, well, this because this place isn't meant for women. And it's not just about men and women here, it's also about other categories such as race, caste, ability, disability, and so on. Another movie called Hidden Figures, which was a Hollywood film, has one of the characters arguing with, well, not really arguing, but explaining to her superior why she took so long to come back to work. She says, there are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I cannot use one of the handy bike pictures that, Mr. Harrison, my uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. And she kind of goes on and she says, so excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day. So this is a very, very obvious and explicit example of how the way we have constructed infrastructures tell a story of who they are meant for and who can be comfortable in that space. Even now, there is a serious lack of toilets for women. Even knowing the fact that women, research shows that women need to take longer in the washrooms because of several reasons, including the way the seats are designed, including the fact that at any given time, 1 in 5 women are mensurating, and there is, in the current situation, there is always a longer line outside a woman's bathroom than there is hardly any line in a men's bathroom. So it basically is one explicit way through which one can see how infrastructures are gendered. And then there are very evident, again, these are also very evident ways in which one sees that, it's very easy for most of us who receive running water in the taps at our homes, even then perhaps to see whose role it is in the domestic sphere to fill up, let's say, the water filter or the ghada, but in terms of infrastructure, it also becomes important to notice that pipes don't often reach till the last mile. For most part of India, especially those living in unregulated settlements or those that have not been given infrastructural access yet, or don't get pure, clean drinking water or clean water in their neighborhoods. It's mostly women's bodies that act as extensions of infrastructures to bring the water from where it can get to into the home, and that embodied labor that women provides is also as much a part of the infrastructural access to water as is the technique or of running the water through the pipes or monitoring walls and so on. And I mean, here I've referred to two scholars, Yafa Truelove, who's looked at women's bodies as infrastructure, but also at Nikhil Anand's work, who, in his very important essay called Time Pay, shows how rhythms of women's everyday lives are so structured around कब पानी भरने जाना है, कब पानी आएगा, कब पानी नहीं आ रहा है, and the kind of lines that happen, the kind of social relations that enables or does not enable because of the fights that break out between those who can get easy access to water and those who cannot, and when the water goes away, and many of these narratives related to the water pipe reaching or not reaching one's household. Similarly, I, in my work, show how the gender division of labor has continues to shape how technology is designed or sold to us. I mean, on the left, you see an advertisement of a washing machine from Bosch, and very clearly it assigns the role of washing clothes to women of the household. And I'm arguing here, as many others have also done, is that it is these kind of ads that also play a role in reproducing a very fixed gender division of labor within and outside the household. I also have two images here from Indian Railways, where what I want to show here is, in terms of infrastructure and gender, is how representation of particular genders happen in relation to infrastructure. You very clearly see an objectification of the woman who's advertised. I mean, I can't quite read what the advertisement is about, but you see her face on this train. And on the other hand, there is an advertisement of Bharat Ka Kavach, which has Narendra Modi on the top. And here there is a sense of how, the Prime Minister of India is creating infrastructures for protecting, or Kavach kind of also is a shield. So there is, I mean, the trope of man as protecting Mother India or a masculine protection of the feminine has consistently kind of reproduced itself across countries, across eras, and very clearly reflects even in how we understand our relationship to infrastructures. So I draw upon two kind of literature kind of areas. And one of them is the emerging area of critical infrastructure studies that looks at infrastructure as not an artifact, but as something that enables circulation, that is an assemblage or a network of several different things that are material, that are ideas, that are people, that are capital, and so on. And that critiques the idea of infrastructures as just mere backdrop. They are not, as Larkin says here, simply out there on, like, they're not a stage on which social activity happens. They as much engage with the social activity and either enable or disable certain kinds of social relations as even as they are shaped by these social relations. So that relationship is very dynamic, and critical infrastructure studies literature really kind of tries to understand that dynamic. Also, Nikhil Anand's work that talks about how, which is the previous work that I showed on the hydraulic city, where infrastructures become key sites for the administration of life. This is through state control of infrastructural access. This is through, things like the meter. This is through the paperwork required to gain access. and many other things. Or building a road, for example, is a claim to territory, and therefore administration of life in that particular area comes under the governance of the state that lays the road, and therefore it becomes, I mean, road becomes very, very political. Um, Ash Amin's work here, when he talks about how in critical infrastructure studies we are seeing a new genre of thinking that narrates the social life of a city through its material infrastructure. So again here, Amin is drawing upon the idea of infrastructure not just as a mere backdrop, but as something that allows us to see the dynamic between social life, social relations, and the materiality of the infrastructure, and that how each one of them is like mutually constituted. A lot of this work stems from an early work by Susan Leigh Starr, and who is a feminist scholar herself. And she writes, infrastructure is both relational and ecological. It means different things to different groups and is part of the balance of action, tools, and the built environment, inseparable from them. It is also frequently mundane to the point of boredom, involving such things as plugs, standards, and bureaucratic forms. I mean, I have on the right Corbusier's Modular Man, just to bring your attention to the notion of standards and how the standards that govern architecture are themselves so gendered, in the sense that when we look at proportions, the proportion through which the city of Chandigarh is designed take as their norm the 6-foot man. And I mean, and then when everything is designed on the basis of that kind of a proportion, or that kind of like how much does the man or how much does the modular man need in terms of like the walking distance, or the kind of chairs also were designed. So all of that, where the plugs are placed, so many of these things, just by establishing a particular norm as one gender and not bringing diversity in, really limits the possibility of a more diverse engagement in that space or building. Like I mentioned, Susan Starr's work, who comes from the lineage of feminist scholarship. I also draw from feminist geography, and I also I argue that feminist research has really shown us the way. I mean, in some ways, it's opened up the Pandora's box for us. It has opened up things that were hitherto invisible to how we could, how we conceptualized or how we related to objects or relations. And that has come because of the feminist insistence on understanding space as relational, as a process, as open-ended, as political, and as constituted by a throw-togetherness. And here I draw from Doreen Massey's work and her very, very important book for space. And what it does when you start looking at space as relational and as a process, you start seeing binaries such as nature, society, man, woman, subject, object, as mutually constituted and not just opposites of each other, but something that, I mean, you kind of have both of them are constructing the other through a particular social relationship that is historically contingent. Feminist geographers, and as I cited earlier, Yafa Trulov's work has shown, and Anand's work has shown us a temporal and rhythm analysis of how infrastructures are used and by whom. My own work tries to understand what visible infrastructure conceals. For example, I try to unearth the subaltern and the subterranean stories of a road, what it enables and what it denies. And then I think a very critical contribution of feminist geographers has been to link scales, such as the national and the global, but also the very embodied, the affective, the intimate, to that of the global. And here Sarah Smith's work is something that I rely on for that kind of an understanding. And I argue that this way of looking at social and the spatial really allows us to investigate infrastructures as assemblages, as matter that enables the circulation of other matter, as networks, and as those as those assemblages that also rely on particular meanings that are also very diverse depending on where you are coming from. So that's the background of some of my work. Some of how my work is framed. But then now I will come to presenting an understanding of roads. And for this particular presentation, I kind of pose the question for you to think about, like, how are roads, which are such mundane objects, which are like, just basically winding sheets of tar and gravel, and that are kind of the base for automobiles to drive upon. Like, how can something as so devoid of life, as something that is so obviously material, like what kind of relation it has to gender? But then here there is, so like I said, I am committed to excavating the subaltern and the subterranean stories that surround gender, and in that there are questions of why is the road built, what does the act of building a road in a ecologically fragile landscape mean or do to the landscape? Who builds these roads? How are these roads used? Who has access to these roads? How does does everyone feel safe on that road? And so when you start asking these kind of questions of the road, you start seeing how something that you might have ignored as like a mere backdrop starts coming to life. And obviously you start seeing relations of gender, of caste, of regional identity, and ideas of defense and development surrounding um, the road. So what I have been doing for past several years is conducting what I call a mobile ethnography. It's an ethnography of infrastructure that is stretched across time and space. These sketches are by my niece Noor Sharma, and we co-published them in an article in Roadsides. And in that ethnography, I've been spending time in Jharkhand, which is the picture on the left, where most of the labor that I have interacted with come from, and particularly from the district called Dhumka. Um, and the middle picture, on the left, is from the train. There are several overcrowded trains that around May bring the labor to these road construction sites, to road construction camps called RCCs in the Border Roads Organization um, uh, kind of lingo, to places on the roadside on which they live. Uh, and so just to show you here, on basically the people that are constructing the road, the people from two regions that I have met, but this particular paper I'm focusing on those from Dhumka district. But there are often groups from Nepal that are also constructing roads for Border Roads Organizations in the Upper Himalayas, and then there are large groups from Dhumka district in Jharkhand that are constructing these roads in the Upper Himalayas. In fact, the prevalence of people from Dhumka constructing these roads in Ladakh is so high that the locals in Leh call them call them by Dhumka, like how as like instead of naming them, they're called Dhumka, and like either Ana Dhumka, or so that is used. So, and I really did want to bring the stories of those that construct the roads that we travel on into a larger history and geography of these roads that often kind of we celebrate in our national television or elsewhere, these shiny like sheets of tar that have been built in the upper reaches of the Himalayas, and often inaugurated by important people in the government. Um, and sometimes you see an image of a uniformed border roads organization person next to it, but you hardly ever see who is it that braved their their journey, who met with all the risks to actually break rock in those very, very harsh terrains. um, So I have been following these road construction laborers from Dhumka district in Jharkhand. They come by train. The black dotted line shows their train journey, usually to recruitment sites, which the one that I have visited was in Nagrota near Jammu. And then they are assigned, after the recruitment, they are assigned with the particular road construction site, and then like shoved onto trucks and transported to their road construction sites, where they often pitch their tents right next to where they're going to be constructing the road. So the where they're living is also quite dangerous, because rocks can fall on them anytime. But also amidst all the dust and like that is generated while the road construction is going on. Um, so I have over the years kind of engaged with them, and more recently there were a very important initiative by the Jharkhand government, where their Chief Minister Hemant Soren has really tried to bargain with the Border Roads Organization for better humane conditions of the laborers going from Jharkhand. He pushed for a MOU between the state of Jharkhand and Border Roads Organization. This has yet to come through, but they have been in the process of at least documenting, along with a think tank called Policy Development and Action Group, at least who all the laborers are, like giving a face to the people who build the infrastructure that we so often use. And as we all saw, the lockdown brought those faces right in front of us on the road that perhaps they have constructed. People that we had forgotten, that we kind of shove under the carpet, and like the world runs seamlessly, and yet we are they are invisible to our eyes, especially like as we go about our everyday lives. Um, Again, for anybody who's traveled up to the upper Himalayas, so I'm mainly looking at the Indo-Tibetan border road, but also the Manali-Leh highway. And I mean, I quickly will go back. The reddish-orange line here shows the routes that I have traveled over the years, and stopped at various road construction sites, sometimes even lived next to them, and interviewed them and gathered their stories and their narratives over all these years. And so any of you who also traveled on these roads, the border roads sign themselves give a very give give very gendered ideas about the road itself. And here you will see two kinds of gendering happening. One is obviously talking about the heterosexual relationship, about if you're married, divorce speed, and also looking at be gentle on my curves, darling, I like you, but not so fast. But then the notion of conquering nature itself has been talked about as a masculine idea. So welcome to the tough and the free, the mountain tamers. And there are others like we conquer the mountains. So there is that sense of strong masculinity that is out there, constructing these roads in the border areas of India and elsewhere, and in so many ways claiming territory, defending territory, conquering nature, claiming the mountains, exploring, discovery. All of these are terms associated with a very, very masculine sense of the way our social relations are constructed. So in this particular work, I have, like I said, I've been following these journeys of the road construction laborers, and a lot of interesting narratives have come forth. For example, so how does this work? Around April end or May, the Border Roads Organization sends a letter of to people whom they have identified as mates. Mates are middlemen who are assigned the task of gathering about 40, or sometimes the number varies, laborers from their villages and around, and then bringing them to the recruitment camp. And then the mate goes around from house to house and tries to lure people, especially young men, to come accompany him on this journey. And those narratives are also filled with, tales of adventure, of let's go, we'll go. I mean, there was one person who told me that he was 17 when he first went on the road construction work, and he really looked forward to it because he knew that he would get to see apples growing on trees, and he had never seen them before. And it's a very exciting travel for many of them also. I mean, they talk about. I mean, many of them have told me, "Madam, आप तो पैसे दे के घूमने आते हो, हमें तो आने के लिए यहाँ पर पैसे मिलते हैं." So there is that. And there is a history of why recruitment happens from Dhumka, but I will not go through it here. If there is a question, I will speak about it, but it's there in my work. You can read it. Some of my work I've been citing in the presentation. It's below in white. So, but what I want to draw attention to here is that, we build a road and we talk about how it has connected places, but there's a whole prehistory of that road. There is a whole circulation that has made that road possible. And for the most part, that circulation is highly gendered. Because so when in May these people start coming from Jharkhand to Nagrota, the trains are like really, really cramped. I mean, they're so cramped that if you're sitting in one place, you basically are sitting in that one place and for those 2.5 days that it takes from Dhumka to get to Nagrota and to Jammu. So, and the kind of tightness, the smells, the bodily closeness, the sweat, the difficulty in going to the washroom, all of that. I mean, there are people, if I ask them, there were several who said whose newly wedded wives were after them to bring them also along to work on road construction sites. And the men would look at me and say, आपको तो पता है ट्रेन में कैसा हाल होता है, ये कैसे आएंगी? And here, many of them have also questioned. So the question here is like, why can't they question, like saying, why can't the government start more trains for us during that time? Like, why is it that we have to travel in conditions which are subhuman? And obviously gendered, like I showed. Well, this is when they reach the recruitment camps. And here, especially the year that we went, the labor was having to wait. They had already waited for about 3 weeks when we reached on that camp as the recruitment process unfolded, which involved, taking a photograph, health checkup, opening a bank account, um, and like the other paperwork, checking IDs, etc. And here for 21 days, life was being lived out in the open. So things like shaving, cooking, bathing. On the right, you see them, they had to undress from the waist up and then show themselves to the doctor who would then examine them for their able-bodiedness and their ability to work in harsh conditions. And again, in some of my research, I have shown how this whole waiting process and in the heat of like open, all of this open ground, and people protesting at times and yet like giving in. I mean, to me, it appears that the waiting acts as, I mean, as much as the health of how much stone can this person lift, it's also a test of one's docility and ability or to be disciplined. Where if somebody protests, they're automatically out. Whereas the wait is long enough to make anybody want to protest. So I explored this work elsewhere if you want to look at it further. But here I'm basically pointing to how this waiting also creates a kind of docile subject that will then be the right kind of body and mind in order to be able to work in the harsh conditions of the upper Himalayas, constructing roads for the Border Roads Organization. This was, I mean, I've kind of put it in quotes because it's a quote from many of the workers that I have interviewed. And in fact, this particular construction site, we had to wait for a long time in order to get an interview because this drilling work was going on, and then the blasting was going on, and then the rock would fall. And there was a very interesting show of strength also along with that. As I mean, some of them nonchalantly kind of looking at it as, we'll manage it, like it's not that dangerous, while others, but in the conversation with me, they would say that it's very dangerous work, man. Ma'am, it's not for the faint-hearted, it's a man's job, were the kind of narratives that came forth in this. So clearly, the laborers themselves see themselves as, like these brave men who are working towards constructing these roads in very harsh conditions, and clearly you see a sense of masculinity that gets conveyed through the kind of narratives that come forth from them. Um, Also, there have been narratives like, ma'am, army men only die in the war. Here we can die any day. So there's also a sense of how they are contributing towards the nation state and its development and defense. And there's also sadness to the fact that there's a person, Hira Lal, who asked me, the names are all changed, said, he said, मैम मैं भी तो हिंदुस्तान हूँ, फिर मेरी हिफाजत कौन करेगा? So there's also a sense of being put onto the side, not being noticed, not being acknowledged, in terms of when road infrastructures are celebrated. Now, there is one masculinity that is claimed by the laborers when they're doing this dangerous work and how they see their work on the road. But then when you look at the kind of, so they're like, I've also looked at, for example, travel logs of tourists that really, that will say that how they have conquered a remote space, like they'll be in a motorbike in the upper Himalayas talking about how they've traversed this remote space. And also obviously the sense of conquering nature, the masculine pride that comes with it is very clear in some of those images and travel logs. Similarly, when you see pictures of higher officials, uniformed men, there is a sense of pride and masculinity that is conveyed about their own work on the border roads, in the website, in the images. However, when the same people talk about the migrant laborers, there are shifting kind of trajectories. So, I mean, this quote probably doesn't do justice to the whole long narrative, but what I'm trying to convey in the first one, in the interview with the BRO officer, was, we hire them, madam, because they're strong and loyal. Look at them work. Nothing ever happens to them. And in the longer narrative, what comes forth is that his idea that these are tribal men and somehow their bodies are naturally constructed to do this kind of hard labor. They just need to be disciplined. And the disciplining task lies with the Border Roads Organization. And therefore, there is very clearly a gendered relationship attached to it. Similarly, the mates kind of really create them as effeminate beings who are almost like children, and who need to be taken care of and disciplined and maybe even scolded at times. So many of the maids tell me that these are young people, ma'am, and they do not know how to take care of money. They will spend it all and will have nothing to show when they get back. I have to scold them sometimes, just like my own children. So here are these men performing this very difficult and dangerous task of constructing the nation's road, and they are also constructed as uncivilized and tribal and effeminate and almost childlike, that need a control from the top in order to be able to do their work. then again, I go back to how the men see themselves when they do. I mean, so because when they go back home, they don't do their cooking or the washing clothes and so on. So then I ask them that how do you like manage all of this? And here it's very interesting how when cooking or cleaning is happening back home, they see that as an easy task and therefore assigned to women. Whereas when it is happening in the road construction camps, they tell me in great detail how it is so tough to cook in higher altitudes because the water boils at higher temperature, and washing clothes is so dangerous because it's glacier water, and in order to have a bath you need immense courage, um, and many narratives that talk about how again. Their work on the road, and especially the works of reproduction where they have to do the domestic tasks that they otherwise do not do, are also as difficult or dangerous as perhaps constructing the road. Mm. Now, in terms of masculinities that I have talked about so far, I mean, you see how, so there's literature in the field of masculinity studies that talks about how there is no one way to look at masculinity, or there are many, like in different contexts in terms of space and time, masculinity is constructed in a diverse range. So there can be many ways of being a man. And I see that so much in the way narratives of masculinity are constructed um, in the lives of these men who travel to build the road construction or travel for road construction. So in this slide, I have this was, and then there are certain objects that get associated with masculinity. For example, having a bike. In Jharkhand, having a fancy phone um, becomes, and traveling to far off places, remote places, become assigned to masculinity. So, in fact, many of the laborers whom I spoke with spoke about how it was a rite of passage for them. So, before, when they left home for the first time to work as road construction labor, their families would often think of them as young boys or children. But when they came back after doing 6 months up in the upper Himalayas, they were seen as men. Similarly, others ended up buying a fancy phone or a motorbike when they got back, and that, like in the hierarchy of social relations in their village, really kind of took it. I mean, it was an enhancement of their manhood. uh, Another one bought an auto rickshaw, I remember. So this one, we went to a village fair, and there was this person who was wearing a sweatshirt, more like a shirt, saying Khardungla, 18,380 feet, highest motorable road in the world. I was there. So he was very proudly proclaiming his journey, which was actually very, very tough over there. And the way they were treated, it was very emasculating in the kind of way they were almost disciplined as children, or um, like spoken down to, and yet none of that story reaches back home. The story that reaches back home is that of the hero who has traveled far off remote regions in the country, done important work, and has proven their manliness to the rest of their communities. So with that, I'm going to I gave you a peek into the work that I do and how, something as mundane as a road is gendered. Um, and I have this slide up here which talks about, so I have traveled from 2011 and most recently was 2021. And each time I had a group of summer interns or PhD students or um, research assistants accompany me in the journey to the border roads areas, and I would like to acknowledge their presence and contribution to this work. And we all learn from each other, including the laborers themselves have taught us a lot in terms of how to survive in a higher altitude, I've learned from them how to break rock without splinters coming into my eye, um, how to how to kind of cross roads that have a lot of boulders on them, and other narratives. So those I'll keep for another interaction another time. For now, thank you, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Anu, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk and valuable insights on what, where, when, and how gendered infrastructures come to be. And it's interesting when you say giving faces. I mean, our Prime Minister certainly loves that, putting his up, but we rarely see the true contributors, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be services to the nation, and it's very rarely seen that their names are, cases for that matter, are brought into the front. So we now move on to an interactive session from the Avani community where students and faculty will engage with you, Anu, in the form of questions and answers. And I'll be moderating that. But before that, I'd like to put it forward to the community present here if there are any reflections or questions that anybody wants to put out.
Okay, so you're primarily talking about the patriarchal system, right? And you're giving cases for it. So, so I wanted to ask you if there's an alternative system that would provide the development and progress. I wanted to ask you that, and also there was a problem with the laborers feeling proud of their work. So I didn't understand that, but these were the two
Yeah.
questions.
Can you? I didn't quite catch all of the question. If you can just.
Yeah, so the first question was you're talking about patriarchal system and how it's developing. It's providing a development system for the Himachal region. So I wanted to ask if there's an alternative system that would provide that is better than the system that you are talking about. And the second one was that there was a problem with the laborers feeling proud of their work. And I wanted to know what that problem was.
Yeah, no. So I'll take your second question first. There is no problem with the laborers feeling proud of their work. In fact, I mean, that's the reason that I'm writing the book, is to bring their stories to the front, to acknowledge their efforts, and build it as part of a national narrative of the understanding of the roads. So there isn't a problem there. In terms of your first question, you're saying, is there an alternative to patriarchy? Did I get it right?
Yeah.
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 All right. So, see how I kind of spoke about in the beginning in terms of we very clearly live in a man's world. The world was constructed when it was largely men who were building the cities, and not just all men, it was mainly, mostly the upper caste and middle class, often in other countries in the West, white men who had the privilege to take decisions on how our structures, our cities, and our institutions are built. And then, slowly, we also saw that women entered the workforce, and they entered a space which was not defined to them. They entered cities. I mean, initially, public spaces in the cities were largely occupied by men, and then you start seeing women also claiming their space in the cities. Well, slowly, once they started also pushing for change. For example, the fact that now, at least according to law, you need an equal number of toilets for men and women is very recent. And that change has come out of a struggle. So somebody who is who is comfortable and has the world made out for them is not going to see your problem. So only those who struggle will see the problem, right? And then how, and obviously the person who's comfortable is not going to give an inch of the space. So any kind of change will only come through asking for it and from a struggle. And that struggle is not new. That has been going on. Many things have changed over the years. For simple things like the right to vote, simple things like equal work, equal pay for equal work, simple things like women want to feel free and without fear when they're roaming around the streets. Now we also see other diverse voices. We see the queer community. We see those who are differently abled. We see people from different castes and races claiming access to these spaces. So the ideal world, which we have a long way to get to and will only be achieved through struggle and questioning, is when every single one of us feels, that they are not hindered because of the way our institutions and structures are designed.
I wanted to ask if there's an alternative to development. The idea was the
Development.
Yeah. So, like, for example, you were talking about how they were constructing roads, and there was a labor force that was primarily men because they are physically stronger, and so that was the argument you were trying to make, right? And is there
Well,
an
I was trying to
alternative?
show you. Is there an echo happening, or is it only happening for me?
No, there's no echo.
Okay, I got an echo here. So basically, I'm not arguing for against development at all. I'm just showing you what it entails. I'm just showing you that when we travel a road, there is a whole another story also to the road that we often tend to forget. Of course, there are several people looking at development and questioning it also in terms of where has it gotten us. I mean, with notions of climate change, with the ecological crisis, with the social and spatial injustice thriving despite our progressive ideals. There are several scholars who talk about the notion of degrowth. And if you really want to understand alternatives, perhaps I'll kind of direct you to Arturo Escobar's book on the pluriverse. So maybe you can look at that. I'm not really talking here about alternatives. I'm basically kind of showing how, bringing forth how the idea that infrastructures are mere dead backdrops is a flawed idea. I wanted to show how they're imbued with meanings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Atul. Anyone else would like to put up a question, maybe? Or any reflection, anything? Nobody? Okay, I have a few questions that I had from beforehand from the students. So one of them, I'll just read it out. They have asked to be anonymous when asked these questions. So the first question is, when we talk about neutralizing gender spaces, can we say that it is the historical design approach which gives rise to segregation of spaces, or is it social discrimination practices that gives rise to such outlook?
I think it's both, right?
Yeah, even I think it's both. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay, the next one is design practice is always influenced by the dominant practice of the time, and it says a lot about the societal culture and the spirit for that matter. How do you think the current progressive change in the outlook should be manifested in design terms to project the inclusivity and not make it exclusive?
I think y'all should be answering that. Y'all are the designers. I am not quite a designer. I left architecture long time back. But again, here, I think if design can be so, Ujjint kind of knows about the Abohar project. And one of the things, see, when as architects we see ourselves as those that will draw a line which will dictate the social life of those that inhabit what we draw and what we build, uh, then there becomes a slight bit of uh, um, like an inflexibility that comes with it. Whereas, so in the Abohar project, what we try to do, especially in the urban context, is look at design as a prompt, is look at design as something that initiates a conversation. It creates a sense of community and something that challenges certain established social hierarchies. And through that process, then, perhaps even celebrates. I mean, for example, when we look at Lefebvre's notion of right to the city and that how conflict is inherent in the way urban spaces are built, well, then why should we kind of subdue and suppress that? Like, can it be actively engaged with in the design process, in the process of inhabiting urban space, and in the way that it is conceptualized? So yeah, I mean, I'm not the best person to answer questions on design practice, but that is my little take on it.
Yeah, I think especially when you say the award project, I think the municipality and the IS officer there was very helpful in
Yeah.
integrating these ideas with the prompts that prompts that were being proposed. Yeah, so I'd like to take one more.
Hi, good evening, Anu. This is Saumini, members
Hi,
of the
hi,
faculty cohort. So this is not a question really, but this is more of a experience that one has had in the public domain of cities in Kerala. Public toilets and the issues related to public toilets have been very close to my heart for some time. And what one observes in the public spaces of Kerala is that men are really privileged in the sense they are permitted, quote unquote, to relieve themselves in public spaces, which sort of, you know, generates these distinct zones of urination, which are, which usually women keep away from. One is forced to move away from that zone. However, if a woman has to relieve herself, one has to wait for approximately 6 to 8 hours to find the right public toilet which is woman friendly, or for that matter someone who belongs to the non-binary gender normative category finds it very difficult to neither find a space nor relieve themselves. So now in a society like Kerala, where you might find this right underneath the statue of a woman freedom fighter, which is kind of a very dichotomous situation one finds oneself in. Similarly, one of the observations was Beverages Corporation in Kerala is one of the most gendered space You have men standing in the queue for hours in front of the Beverages Corporation. But if you go inside, you will actually find women who are appointed by the Beverages Corporation, which is a government-run corporation, sitting in the counter to bill. So I just wanted to draw your attention to some of these, juxtapositions that you find in Kerala's public, spaces, which are extremely gender. So thank you so much for the insightful lecture, Anu, and we really look forward to your recent publication. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think one of this, Anu, if you can recall what Som just said, and based on what you have discussed today, if you recall my second semester postgrad, Kalka. So we were working in that town. Mandi is the floating market, as in it's a weekly market which sets up and then disassembles, and then in some other place it'll happen. So one of our strong observations there in the Mandi of Kalka. Now Kalka is a North Indian town. It's on the way to Shimla from Chandigarh. Yeah. So what we observed there was, like, the Mandi is set out, we set out to sort of document all kinds of infrastructure. So we made I think a manual of different drawings of the different sizes of infrastructure that is put up, assembled, disassembled. We ended up doing tail, we ended up doing regular trade, vegetables, this and that. So when the final thing came, okay, wait, let's do toilets now. So there were no toilets. And then when we started inquiring, the men who were there, they would just point out that, oh, look, there's a nook and corner there. You go there and do your job. So we went there and then we saw it's nothing. It's just a corner in a particular area, which comes to show, and that was the infrastructure that was supporting them, which comes to show, like, automatically you start thinking what happens to the women of that particular place, because a lot of women would come there trying to sell their fruits and vegetables. And we never found any data. So I remember in the final jury, we started that with the infrastructure. We did retail, we did fruits, vegetables, and then we came to toilet. We did the male part. We showed that photo, and then in the female thing, we left the slide blank. So then they asked us why you did that, and then we explained the whole thing. It's really interesting to see all of that, Anu, and yeah, it's been amazing to have you here. Especially when you say that you have moved far along, even more further away from architecture, but I don't think that's true. But deep down rooted in the spirit of architecture, that's why you are decoding such beautiful things out of society at large. So I'd now like to invite Dr. Somni Raja for the final vote of thanks.
Hi, everyone. So it gives me immense pleasure to extend my sincere gratitude on behalf of Avani community to Anu for our insightful lecture. Your attempt to narrate infrastructure not as an artifact, but as an assemblage, factors that enable other matter, is deeply engaging and thought-provoking. Engaging in the pedagogical and professional environment with the critical insights that you have put across, I'm sure will encourage newer perspectives and shape our agencies to society at large. And I'm very confident that this session has impacted most of our students and faculty alike to reflect on their own mediums of expression and spatial practices. I wish to take this opportunity to thank members of Avani community for joining us today. And I'd also like to thank the entire BVBA team, student volunteers, graphics team, admin and IT team for organizing this event. And I hope all students have gained immensely from Anu's lecture on gendered infrastructures. So thank you all for your participation. Thanks so much, Anu, and wish you a very good evening. And we really look forward to hosting you in person at Avani soon. Thank you so much, and please take good care of yourself. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone, including the students here, who very patiently heard me out. Thanks to Jens and Soumya and the whole Avani community. Thanks very much for hearing me out.
Thank you. Thank you, Anu. I'll see you later.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.